Hey folks, welcome to Show and Tell, the podcast from Indicator that takes you inside digital investigations by leading journalists, OSINT investigators, threat analysts, and researchers. I'm Craig Silverman.
And I'm Alexios. Indicator Media is a resource for professionals and citizens who want to investigate and understand digital deception. If you are here by mistake, if you got confused, we hope you will stick around and look for our investigations and workshops.
And you can also sign up to our free newsletter. We'll have the link in the show notes. You can also just go to indicator.media. And of course, you can hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss another episode of Show and Tell.
Big thank you to our founding sponsor, Lead Stories, which is a global fact-checking organization with journalists working in a dozen languages around the world. Lead Stories combines old-fashioned journalism skills with technology to find and debunk false claims on social media. And they believe, and I happen to agree, that fact-checking is about adding information, not censoring. Today, we are talking to Omer Benjakob, the disinformation and cyber reporter for Haaretz. Hi, Omer.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're thrilled to have you. Omer was part of the Project Pegasus Investigative Journalism Consortium and is focused on the intersection between technology and politics. He also writes about Wikipedia. So if you are an Indicator reader, a lot of the stuff that Omer writes, if not all of the stuff that Omer writes, you should be interested in.
That's very kind of you.
Oh, no, of course. I wouldn't say it to anyone. So I saw Omer give a short talk in Perugia, and you were trying to make fetch happen in the sense that you were trying to mainstream this term DaaS, or disinformation-as-a-service. I am a sucker for a good acronym. I understand though that maybe not everyone is. But can you tell us a little bit why you think it's worth to think about DaaS, to put this in some kind of, in this context, why you felt like framing it this way mattered?
So I'll kind of take the opportunity to name check and thank you said your founding sponsors, Lead Story. Just today I use them in my actual reporting because Haaretz, it's a really interesting example to start with. Haaretz was spoofed, so someone created a fake Haaretz-like domain, Haaretz 24. It's very reminiscent of Doppelganger and things we've seen in the past, where it was like a complete, just like technical copy of the Haaretz website. The domain was Haaretz 24 or something like that. And shockingly or not shockingly, there was one link being pushed out about how Zelensky is linked to some Jewish oligarch who is actually a real oligarch who does actually live in Israel. And of course, there's some unholy corruption happening in this echo space. And of course, Haaretz diligently reported this. I think, and the byline, I think, was for like our transportation reporter or something. Like, so they fudged the byline, like it was the wrong reporter, but everything else looked quite real. And I kind of had to debunk that. And one of the things already up in the air, which kind of helped me say that the actual story was debunked, was the organization. And I think this is a good way to connect to DaaS. This kind of concept of DaaS is to say it's an industry that undermines the conditions of possibility that make kind of personal accountability possible and keep all of us straight. DaaS as an industry undermines, and I think it does it in two ways. So one, it creates these fake humans. So that's kind of the main asset that is sold. But it also kind of dilutes credibility online in a very kind of interesting way. I think we have this very sad kind of, I'd almost call it like poverty of intellectual debate around disinformation online. So much of our debate is like obfuscated by social media interest, and this, like, it's a content moderation debate so much of the time, or it's like a free speech debate so much of the time. And I think we miss these kind of like more economic or structural things. And I think, you think about how my newspaper makes money. Like, we pay people like me to do good work that takes lot of time to do, with the assumption that if I do good journalism, someone will be willing to fork out, like roughly more than $100 for a subscription, because subscriptions, I have to provide like real journalistic value for that, and the ads are that much better, and so on and so forth. But if I'm now competing in a social media feed diluted by fake people putting out fake websites, it becomes that much harder for me to actually be heard and my stories to resonate. And I think in that sense, journalists and media is actually disproportionately affected by disinformation online, as my kind of opening example of this fake Haaretz website shows. Beyond the fact that it's abusing my credibility, it's actually stealing my traffic at some level. It's like stealing my credibility to be able to ride the traffic and influence people, and therefore also undermines Haaretz's credibility in the long run.
It is interesting to kind of think of it like, a lot of times, as you say, the conversation around disinformation is often around the content, right? And so to almost like recenter it around, well, we're talking about, you often need fake humans to spread it. Like sometimes it is like it's an idea and it's a narrative and it's appealing to real humans and it spreads that way. But as we're going to dive into more in a second, a lot of times there's a system underpinning it that it's not just, okay, let's come up with a good catchy idea or a meme and hope real people spread it. It's actually, let's seed a whole network of fake humans. And one of the things that it actually comes to mind for me is that a lot of times when I interact with platforms, when you're talking about fake engagement or fake accounts, obviously they don't like them, they don't want them, but they don't necessarily, that's not their biggest, highest risk activity. But if you allow fake accounts to flourish, then it opens the door to so many other, then they can be used for so many different things, scams, fraud, et cetera, et cetera. And so it is interesting to kind of take it back to sort of a fake human idea on that.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, on the right now, it's going to be both much easier to create credible fake humans with a combination of AI tools, and it also becomes even more of a focus of trust and safety teams at platforms as content becomes so much harder to differentiate between real and fake, and so it does become an even more central space of intervention. But let's talk about DaaS in the context of your series of investigations. This was a few years ago. We'll do then some more recent articles, but your seminal investigations into Team Jorge. It's worth focusing a little bit on the how, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the what. But basically, you pretended to hire this sketchy agency, as one does, to interfere with an election in an undisclosed country in sub-Saharan Africa, in order to get from them the full pitch, right, of their capabilities. So how do you come up with this idea, and what suite of tools did they offer you?
Yeah. So the backstory to this is actually amazing, because I had really the unique privilege and sheer luck to be part of this consortium organized by Forbidden Stories that focused on NSO. And the NSO project was so successful in terms of collaboration, actually showing how when we work together and when we kind of do away with this very old idea of exclusivity, we actually resonate much louder. Like when you have a group of journalists from a group of countries, when the data is so rich that everyone can have their own kind of focus, it just expands the story. It doesn't cannibalize it, quite the opposite. Mm-hmm. So we had this really strong use case, and it was also quite, I think, like we became a kind of this group. And then there was this almost idea to instead of waiting for a leak, to be like, what would we want to do as a group? What would be interesting for us? And disinformation was just topped everything. And the two kind of three questions that was most interesting for us was just who, at a basic level, it's like with viruses, you're like, but who actually does this? Who would create a virus, right? You know what I mean? You have to get into a certain kind of criminal headspace, because most of us don't think like criminals or don't think like political actors in that way, right? And then because we were meeting as this collective to kind of discuss what we're interested in, we were discussing different ideas. And one thing that a lot of us who cover tech were interested in was looking at the avatar industry, because I already back then hated people saying bots. Bots is such a forgive me, BS term. It's so drenched in this technological thing. And I think, Craig, you made a very astute point where it's part of our misplaced vision or idea of disinformation is that it's this really, fully technical thing. It's just fake accounts retweeting saying Trump is great, Trump is great, Trump is great, Hillary sucks, Hillary sucks, Hillary sucks. But it's not actually that. That's where the fake humans come from. It's actually something much more complex that does actually try to sway you. And there are many times real humans in the loop, as we would say now post AI, so-called super spreaders. We know this from the COVID. So it's actually, you really need real people and real assets. That's why it becomes harder over time, because it finds harder to find believable people, right? The more you use an asset, the less believable they be. And then you have to hijack Haaretz, Der Spiegel, Le Monde. You have to actually steal real websites like the Denver Guardian that we saw in 2016 just doesn't cut it anymore. We were interested in how that works, because we knew there was an avatar industry that was actually focused on kind of surveilling social media, because you also need accounts, right, to do deep web analysis. So there's also this industry. And me and two other reporters had this hypothesis that if you run avatars for surveillance, you also get caught, right? The same way if you run avatars just for pushing Trump, you get caught. A real human does a lot of different things. And we had this hypothesis that there was an overlap between these two industries, that if you run avatars to surveil social media, you probably also need avatars to push out some content. And you don't care what content they do, as long as it's just churning out your thing. And then Gulmi Guido, my colleague from the DeMarker, who's genuinely, I think, one of the most talented reporters in the world, just had this idea. He literally said this over wine in Paris. He just said, why don't we just pretend to be the representatives of some non-democratic country, and then try to solicit pitches? And just everyone was that's crazy, that will never work. Some people who have like their countries, don't allow this like ethically, were like, that's really a bad idea. And like all the French and like German and like British reporters were like, that's a great idea. How would you do that? When can we start doing that? And then we kind of joined up with Frédéric Mitterrand from Radio France, and we just started kind of like developing this as a big group, but also with us three core people, because Israel is uniquely poised in a good and bad way for this kind of stuff, because you do have this in Europe, but in Europe you also have very kind of snooty, like highbrow societies. Like you can't just walk into places the same way you can in Israel. So this kind of like what made this stunt possible was just the sheer the very unique nature of Israeli society, where you can like meet an Israeli guy who will just tell you, "Hey, I'm Bob," and you're like, okay, and he's like, I'm Bob too, like let's talk, you know what I mean? There's there's a certain informality that like it just allows this kind of stuff, and we just literally hatched this plan to start a rumor, like to talk to sources and people we knew in this kind of avatar and like private intel spaces, and just kind of say like, hey, have you heard about this French guy, this American guy, and this Israeli guy in Israel? Like there's like, I heard a rumor they're like shopping around for like disinformation. Have you heard anything? And after you do this enough time, like, it's like with a bad tip, right? Like it circles back at you. So you can also start a bad tip, right? And you can say there's some French guy and he's like brought some Jewish American guy who like he's half Israeli or something like that, and there's some Israeli ringer like taking them around, and they're shopping, and they need this service. Like, do you know someone who does this? And at some point,
how long did this take, by the way? Just a curiosity. Like, how long
it took about 2 to 3 months, because it's also like it's part of this kind of, I think investigative journalists kind of know this stuff. Like, you're interested in something, you step into a space, you start like meeting different levels of people, and then you kind of get some sense. But a lot of it was also quite benign, to be honest. Like, that's what makes this industry so interesting. Like, at this low end, cheap end, these people are selling like, likes and followers on Instagram and like plays on Spotify, like to like completely like, just to influencers who want to buy influence. So the political stuff is a bit higher up. So we kind of managed to get even to this kind of almost like, I almost call it like shitty bot dealer level, and then move our way up, because at some point someone saw that we were actually like, a good fishy client. And at some point, someone said, "Listen, you have to meet Jorge. Like, this is the guy you have to meet. I can set this up," and and we managed to like plug into 2-3 guys who set us up to Jorge. Over time, we realized that they were just like sticking around with us for some commission, and we just managed to eventually have a Zoom meeting. I always say like investigative journalism is one of the biggest winners of COVID. Like, you just like they have to do the meeting on Zoom, and they had some OPSEC. It wasn't that like it was without cameras and but like within our first like proper meeting with Jorge, we were just like, I think not like, I genuinely think like we had like doubled or tripled everything that was like known at that point about disinformation as an industry, because he had a system, he had a program. Like, that's kind of the germ of my DaaS idea, right? Because you have SaaS, you have software as a service. It was just that. It was disinformation as a software, and also disinformation as a service, like DaaS with a /s, because like as Jorge explained, like either he uses his software as a service and will create, run, and like actually do an entire disinformation campaign for you by creating these fake accounts and having them push out content that he can also help you create. But he will also sell you this program. So you and he said, I only sell this to governments. So the governments get a program that allows them to then create their own avatars and just push them out. And it seemed like science fiction to us. Like we were seeing like a completely fake video, and we just kept having more meetings with him because they thought we were a very lucrative client, and just kept getting like different iterations of the same pitch. And it reached the point where we kind of had to just say no, like we couldn't take it any further without breaking any law. And then actually the really funny thing about this investigation is that we just did it again afterwards, like to another company, like that is much less technological and just much more focused on what they call deep avatars, which is a scary term. So for example, they presented to me, this is a group called Psy Group. So they were famous because they were caught in the kind of sidelines of the Mueller investigation of disinformation and Trump, but they've since rebranded as Percepto. And they told us that you don't need like lots of digital accounts. You need 1 or 2 good avatars. For example, they have a French-speaking African reporter, a deep avatar called Anita Petit, who has a website called Pour la Veritas, like for the truth. And this website, as these like guys explained to me, has many interests. So sometimes for corporate clients, they explained it's into like, corruption or like, mining rights in like Ivory Coast. But for political stuff, it could also be interested in other stuff, I was told to me. And it's a reusable, smart asset. And she has credibility. She's an independent blogger. So we kind of saw that as an industry. and then shared this kind of materials with the wider group that Forbidden Stories had organized, and put together what I think is actually a very impressive, also open source investigation with the teams from Le Monde and The Guardian and Der Spiegel inside, really doing amazing work. Like, we managed to find, like the people that they stole the photos of the avatars from. And just maybe one more small thing about this investigation. I think the funniest or most like interesting thing we got Jorge to do is to actually do a demo campaign for us. Because at some point you're just like, how is this even real? Facebook is actually claiming with a straight face that they invest like tens of millions of dollars in this, and this just like Israeli guy who doesn't seem that serious. Yeah, it is not like Mossad. Like, he's really not. Like, it was really far away, and it was like the office was kind of corny, and you're like, how did he manage to build a system that within 3 clicks will like create a Gmail with a unique IP from the country with a number linked to it that is SMS verified, will then register a WhatsApp, and then automatically layer new accounts on? Like, how is this even possible, right? So we wanted to test that it's true, and then we had the funny task of trying to think of a disinformation campaign that we could do without causing damage, because we wanted him to just demo it IRL. And like in our meetings with him, it was funny, like in retrospect, it's funny he didn't get that we were journalists. Like, we kept saying like, we want something awesome that we can independently verify, was the actual term we used. And then we came up with this idea. It was like this summer where there was this like very viral animal called Emmanuel the emu. You might remember this. And we just decided, like, after consulting with our legal departments, our first intuition was to ask for a disinformation campaign personally targeting the journalists in the collective, which seemed like a really smart idea. And our legal departments thought we were joking, and like there was a funny moment there when they realized like we didn't think this was like. Then they were like, "What, you wanna pitch yourself as a target?" I'm like, "Yeah, because then the victim won't be mad." And they're like, "No, that's just a terrible idea." And then we just said like, okay, let's just say that this very popular viral animal passed away in its sleep. We found a unique hashtag that we saw was never used on Twitter, and we said, to test your capabilities, we want your avatars to use this. And then the Le Monde team and the Spiegel team just like aucented the bejesus out of this hashtag, and we found close to 21 other campaigns, that some of which like we saw in his videos. So I think that's also very interesting kind of use case for aucent versus like human, whatever. So that's kind of our big.
I'm taking away the lawyers don't care about emus, which is a question for another day, but.
It is kind of a tricky scenario, because it's like you're having a meeting with them, but of course, like, they're selling something and they could be overselling what they actually have. Everybody you're reporting on is a bullshitter, right? But there's something real going on, but you have to also understand.
Especially in this tech space, right? So much of it is hype cycle. So much is over promising. You know what I mean? Like, and it is a tough question. You don't actually know. And remember, at that point, like, the last thing we had heard about this field was Cambridge Analytica. And if you think about what Cambridge Analytica actually is, it was a targeting firm. It was actually part of like an ad stack. You know what I mean? Like, it had nothing to do with the actual content, right? At no point was it alleged that Cambridge Analytica was creating its own campaigns, right? They were just helping them focus and micro-target people based on psychological things. And at some point, this was, I think, the Guardian's most interesting contribution, that they had like the Cambridge Analytica leak. And at some point, like Alex Nix just asks Brittany Kaiser, her, like, hey, what is the name of the guys you work with in Kenya? Like the hackers, the Israeli hackers. And she goes, who, Jorge?
Right.
And you're just like, wow, okay. And it was actually that's the content side, right? So this was the accounts targeting that used for the micro targeting. Like, so I think so of course you don't believe him, because at that point we know bots, we know Russian bots from 2016. That's what we know. Denver Guardian.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting, because you laid out kind of the tech stack that they were using for Team Jorge at the time. And so there was like residential proxies for the IPs. They were getting, I guess they were getting SIM cards to have phone numbers that were, whether it's physical SIMs or whatever, getting a number. And so I'm curious how that kind of stack, is there stuff that like that would still be replicable and usable now? Do you think it's evolved a little bit in terms of these DaaS operations? And is it a lot easier, or is it more challenging for them?
That's a really, really good question. I think a lot of that hinges on how much like good or bad faith you attribute to the kind of big 5-6 tech companies, like the tech giants, and their kind of the way they treat this stuff, because it's always a cat and mouse game, right? Think about NSO and cyber. Like, it's always, they patch this. So that in its of itself is not new. And I think a lot of the stuff Jorge was doing was actually like in Facebook's or in Meta's defense, I'll say, like, it was new. We didn't know that, you could stack, for example, like a real virtual proxy, like a good one that actually uses like IoTs to run through local IPs with one of like, you know, these digital eSIM things, which were still kind of nascent at that time. So like, you know, that, okay, you didn't know you could do that, fine. But today, that raises a lot of good questions. I think like there's some levels that it's easier, in some levels that it's much harder. I'll say this. I think our citizenship, like if you look at the scale of like 100, 2,000 years, like we're no longer citizens in our countries. We're users of government identification databases de facto. And the way your government ID, at least in Israel, is based is verified via Gmail and a 2FA like SMS, right? So, or WhatsApp. Like, so in that sense, Gmail and WhatsApp are de facto our actual state identifiers today. Like at least in Israel. Like if I have to renew my physical ID card, I have to use one of those two identifiers, right? And I think Jorge and these actors get there's a difference. So for example, no one will now open a Facebook account from some like Proton mail. Like that will just be so sus, right? So the idea would be to actually create a fake human, and a fake human is built on these real identifiers. And I always say that like Jorge's avatars are realer than my mom. So my mom is a social worker at like Tel Aviv's main hospital, and she uses like the hospital kind of given email. So she doesn't have a Gmail. She has some like dot, blah, 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 health, gov, whatever. And there's tons of stuff she can't do at a citizen level. Like she can't log into certain systems because they have these defenses against these like bespoke, you know, Outlook. Like everyone's supposed to be on some Gmail or like a meta system, and so they can have the proper 2FA either via SMS or via whatever. And like, and in that sense, like if you were to like OSINT my mom and OSINT Jorge's avatars, my mom would probably trigger more IOCs of like a fake account than Jorge's thing. So I think in that sense, there's a cat and mouse game, but there's also a question of how much we actually update and what. It's a very tough question. I think a lot of the content stuff is now much easier.
You know, you're noting about obviously AI is a game-changing element of scaling these things up. You can generate, you know, thousands of variations of the same narrative, whereas before you might actually have to sit and write them. You know, the other one that I'm encountering right now on an investigation is where they're hiring real workers and the workers don't know actually what the whole thing is about. And then they appear to be taking the real photos of the real workers, and then they sort of tune them up a little bit with AI. So it looks like them, but not 100% like them, would not reverse image search match, maybe would facial recognition match, but maybe not. So it's like we're getting these real, but not real, not 100% AI. And, you know, the degrees to which we're going to have to be dealing with and trying to put these pieces together is, you know, is just going to get increasingly more complex, I think.
100%.
And just a shout out because we spoke about SMS verification too, you know, it's still the heart of some identifications that many other platforms do, you know, like Community Notes on X uses SMS verification as its way to identify other ways, the pseudonymous accounts. And we'll put in the show notes that there's a Cambridge project to track the cost of SMS verification across countries. Before we move to like the show part, because we've had a lot of fascinating tell, but still we want to make sure we have some time for show. I want to talk about a more recent investigation, just so that people don't think that you know, you wrote one thing 4 years ago. You're actually
shut up and play
prolific.
the hit, as they say.
Yeah, you're extremely prolific reporter. So, and I appreciate your work too, that you tend to try and collaborate with journalists outside of Israel as well. A few weeks ago, you wrote a piece with folks at Libération about a smear operation targeting mayoral candidates in France. And the setup was similar, right? It was avatars that invented or amplified false claims, in this case of sexual abuse and kind of other debauchery. What did you see changed? You know, this was a post-AI operation compared to Jorge's work. In some ways, it looked pretty similar, the SOP. In other ways, you know, I noticed in your story there was like a clearly Claude-generated or Codex-generated website that a fishy agency was using to promote its stuff, personalized to the client. You know, how much has the AI changed stuff in the past few years on our beat?
That's a really, really good question. Actually, like I think really dovetails perfectly on what Craig had asked me, because like, for example, like what we saw here in France and to a lesser extent also in Slovenia quite recently is this like websites that come up and then they kind of smear politicians as part of this kind of quite clearly politically linked campaign. And in this case, one of those websites or one of this kind of apparatus thing in France led us to kind of this just digital infrastructure. And at least in my case, like I did this in a collaboration with a reporter, a very good reporter from Libération in France, who was really chasing the story. She's naturally good at web and kind of stuff, but I, using kind of a lot of the AI stuff, managed to kind of help and find other websites. We found some websites that seem to link back to the actual company, right? And one of the most interesting things we learned post Jorge and post Percepto is that, like, another interesting gap here is that we all think in terms of brands. And in this industry, it doesn't work that way, because different people have different techs and different kind of stack and different skills, and they cluster together, and the companies don't matter. The company name doesn't matter. So the company that we found as linked to one of the websites that was part of this anti-far left campaign in France was a company called Blackcore. Blackcore sounds a lot like Black Cube, so anyway, you're like already excited, right? And the website was, as you quite accurately analyzed, my friend, quite clawed in that aesthetic, right? Like, I love that you can just suss it at some point, right?
Yep.
You know what it's like? It's like when you were younger and we would download torrents, and every illegal download was just like a minefield of like bad links. And at some point, you knew which ones were the good links, right? Like you could tell what was the fake. Like, this is a download in a pop up. So it's something like, you just like something about the smooth movement and the rounded. Like, I don't know anything about design. Yeah, just like it's a vibe and it's a font, and it had that, and you're like, okay, so what is my takeaway here is that also now their OPSEC is much easier. Their ability to now set up a company, and I know a lot about this industry in Israel. There's no company called Blackcore. Instead, like, we have 15 years of experience, and it's former Israeli Intel, like blah, 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 blah. And you're like, there's no way. And it's not Black Cube. So it's a BS entity that's trying to steal their thing and now repackage it under that. And I think it's a good example, because they can now set up an entire website, not just for their campaigns, but also for them, right? And then what gets caught is not even like their actual infrastructure, which has happened, because, like, you know, it's like in cyber, like, operators do make small technical mistakes, and then people can pivot and they can do like that research. But what I'm finding, if I'm finding anything, is this like already synthetic kind of layer of OPSEC, which is running under the already synthetic layer of the actual campaign.
Yeah, it was interesting in that one. I mean, and to be clear, it seems like one of the key things that you guys pivoted on was that, you know, you mentioned there's sort of the front-facing brand, but really it was almost like a nesting doll thing. There was this company brand with this company brand, and at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't matter to people who are buying these services. Like, they, you know, sure, you're using fake or deceptive company names. Like, why is that going to bother one of these customers? But it did seem like in that investigation, finding subdomains connected to the domains you had found was key. Is that right?
100%. Like, generally, this whole like DNS subdomains was a huge thing that, like, I think allowed us to kind of map bits and pieces of what was left online, because there was a massive OPSEC delete. Like, the moment this campaign was published by Le Monde, like, you know, like around the time of the actual election, it was a local election in Marseille, in Toulouse, like, you know, all the pages were taken down, like the avatars were deleted, like, as always happens, right? And what was left was this kind of like, it really is fragments, you know what I mean? Like, it's very small fragments that I think the French like intel also kind of has. And I think what's actually interesting from that perspective is that, like, we managed to use that stuff, and it seems that our findings don't actually go much farther than what the French intelligence managed to do. So I think that's cool in terms of, like, I can say, wow, my webin is, like, you know, on par at some level with them, but that's also kind of, that's weird, you know what I mean? That's like dark. Like, how is it that, you know, someone brought in a likely foreign entity to muck in their election, and like a Five Eyes level, like a Western state, top tier Western democracy, is unable to do this, not because of lack of willpower, just because of like the so many levels of like obfuscation are so strong digitally that you actually cannot solve this problem. And like, my answer is as good as the French intel, and there's something really kind of, I don't know, just like dark and strange about that.
Yeah, and I mean, on one level, as you say, it speaks to kind of the power of OSINT and developing these skills and applying these skills, because you always assume, like, oh, they have subpoena power, no, they can do this, no, they can do that. They should be able to find a lot more, you know, and sometimes they can't, right?
No, they really can. And more than that, at some points, they actually hit very serious walls, because, like, I think what we found was part of the stack or part of the infrastructure by the person who was a subcontractor for the company who was actually doing this campaign. So I think, like, the avatar dealer or one of the people on this infrastructure is kind of left holding some of this burning dumpster fire, or like they're chained to it, kind of via their DNS, which they tried to dump, which of course is also like extremely incriminating when you email someone and then like 2 hours later the website goes down. Like the last DNS you see is like suddenly now they like turn off their account.
Yeah.
And I think that sense it's a very strong case for OSINT and generally expanding kind of what OSINT means. And I think that term, like, to be honest, I've never felt really comfortable with it because, like, as I said, like, my early stuff was about Wikipedia. Like, I'm kind of came from like philosophy and the history of science, and I was interested in Wikipedia, and then just found that, like, if you think about it in 2012, like, that's actually a very strong influencer, and I started looking at it, but I called it politics of knowledge online. And then when Haaretz set up this OSINT desk, my boss and my editor, and Avi Sharf, who's an actual like amazing OSINT reporter, he does like plane watching and like he knows this web and stuff, and he's amazing at corporate docs. He's like, I want you to join this OSINT desk. I'm like, but I don't do OSINT. He's like, no, you do the Wikipedia stuff is OSINT. I'm like, no, I just look at the edit history and then try to find the identity of editors based on it. He's like, yeah, that's that. I'm like, no, it's not like Bellingcat. Like, I don't know the shadows, right? Like the shadow thing. Like, I don't know how to do it.
Right.
And he's like, no,
How
it's
do you
really,
subcalc? Yeah.
again, it all looks like the Sahara to me. Like, I'm so bad at geography. And like he said, no, that's also kind of it. And I think it's also a confidence thing. And after you work with good researchers that help you kind of stuff. And I think it is interesting because like I did try to get over the years, like, people gave me pro bono programs, for example, like OSINT programs. And I think I was scared to use them. And I think there's something really good about learning like methodologies, I would say. Then you're empowered to do that. And maybe some of these programs were also too tough for me. But like, I think there's this kind of, confidence intellectual thing where you're like, it's a lot of different things, and you can bring yourself and learn these methodologies and deploy them in surprising contexts like today.
Well, so why don't we dive in a little bit? I would love for you to show us a little bit of like a tool or technique that you rely on over and over.
Yeah.
And give us a sense of what that is.
Well, I'll do a backstory and then I'll share. So like,
Okay.
because Israel's a pretty small like media ecosystem, there's not a lot of people doing like critical tech reporting. And for the past 2 years, I'm not ashamed to say this, like I've made part of my kind of, I do public speaking in Hebrew in Israel alongside my journalism. I've made kind of a side living from like, railing against AI and saying it's just like a hype cycle that is mostly compensating for the enshittification of Google. That was my kind of initial take. I'm like, yeah, it's the scaling of something that, it's actually existed for quite a while. Like, if you know what, like your feed is AI, come on. And like what's actually changed is that now it's just accessible to me as well. People are looking for funny use cases, so you can make like Studio Ghibli porn or whatever you want to do, and like, but mostly the actual value of this in terms of its uses, it's compensating for the fact that SEO and PDF farming have just decimated Google's real value. So now I can actually ask like knowledge-based questions, and the chat thing seemed cool to me, but that was a UX function, right? And then I saw slowly the things kind of mature, and then at some point around, I don't mind saying this, but like '03, the GPT 03, I started like listening to my friends in Israeli tech, and they were like, listen, try this with terminal, like try doing code. And I was like, no, I don't know code. I have an MA in like the history of science and philosophy, like I don't know code. And I think for so many of us, like who were born in like late 80s, early 90s, whatever, like, and remember computers before internet and then internet, like the terminal was this just kind of like frontier. Like that's the difference between people who are good with words and will go study like philosophy or journalism or whatever, and your friend who knows computing. Like that's it. That was it. The terminal was just this like this barrier. And in that sense, I think the chat aspect of the chat GPT was ingenious in that, yes, natural language is a huge thing. But around the '03, I did kind of get that Python, which is something that I'd heard about, does at some level look kind of like natural language, or it's structured as if it's some like, if not now, kind of logic that, as someone who's like, if you study philosophy, you have a very high tolerance for. And I'm like, compared to what? To Wittgenstein, like for a second, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I can deal with this for a second, like, you know what I mean? I've studied like formal logic. I'm not good at this stuff, but I kind of just went with it, and the fact that I could keep taking it to a chat allowed me to create like initial tools. And then it changed like 4 or 5 months ago with Claude Desktop and Cowork, and since some point using terminal as on Claude like just via my terminal. I think for a journalist, what makes it a game changer is the fact that it runs locally, which also means that I actually have, since I run local models for certain things, because privacy is a huge issue. Like I don't store my, for example, transcriptions of my source meetings on Google Cloud. I have a huge transcription issue because I don't want to use things that are cloud-based unless I'm like really, really fine. So I'll try a bit Google Pinpoint and these other kind of tools that they give journalists, but like it was an issue. And I can say now that I have a fully functioning toolkit that I will now show you 2 instances of, and one of them, which I will not show you, is a local transcriber that is trained on my like weird Hebrew English mix, because I write about tech and I talk in Hebrew, and each transcribers have this very kind of basic dichotomy, right? It's you have to pick the language, right? Because it has to pick a model, and mine doesn't do that. Mine just goes, it takes forever. It's really inefficient. It would be a really bad product, but it's an amazing product for me, and it has a unique like dictionary of all my terms, and it runs locally, and it solved my problem because now I trust my transcripts. And I don't mind that it's 4 times longer. Literally, like it will take it for, because it does 3 times and it runs and then it backups and it.
But it's still shorter than you transcribing it yourself, so you're still winning, right? So
and my confidence in it is actually quite high. And then over time, once I've actually structured my work in a way, I now have a database of transcripts, again, completely local, which I can now, you know, now this idea of actually thinking about building some local knowledge base of, you know, fields or sources becomes realistic. And I think that is also like I can now participate in data science as an abstract thing, and that's been really interesting for me, someone who doesn't have that side and is just completely qualitative. And I've just, to be honest, found it so empowering.
So, you know, usually when people do a show and tell, there's like a cool, you know, UI. You're taking us into a terminal.
Yeah.
So, but it's great because I agree with you. Like I work in the terminal now as well with Claude Code.
Okay, so I'm not.
And I was intimidated by it as well. Oh, it looks like you've built your own here that actually has a little bit of UI. That's nice. But I echo your point to people listening. If you consider yourself to not be like a code person in the terminal of using that as intimidating, you should try it, is what I will just say quickly. But this is cool. All right, talk us through this.
Okay, so like we're kind of cutting to the end. This is an actual toolkit I built. It sits locally on my computer. I actually use it in my day-to-day kind of operations. And I'm going to show you just 2 kind of tools that I think. This is a mock-up of it, but also for kind of OPSEC. So all the to-do list that I built on the side is fake. But these are the real.
I was just looking at that. I'm like, oh crap.
No, it's okay. I thought this through. It's okay. I saw this through. So this is a fake. This is just generated about general things that I'm kind of interested in. But the tools are all real. My tool script looks exactly like this, based on a real HTML. By the way, I just said that, like, I've actually created this, and I think this is something that people who are from the 90s will remember also. Like, I have a homepage again. Like, I actually kind of like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, no, really, like, this is my homepage now. It's not everything for me. I don't start my day here, right? So I don't have any OSINT, like, I don't read my news here. But I do kind of, like, it is an integral part of my work. Anything from just, like, plugging in things on my transcriber, for example, which, like, doesn't actually work. I'm sorry, demo mode, right? But also having this, like, to-do list, which I've kind of, you know, built, which lets me organize. So,
and to be clear, how many of these are like custom built things versus, oh, this is like available on a GitHub and you integrated it here in yours?
Okay, so just because you asked, and I'll blow my own horn, none of these are linked to GitHub at any level. All of these are fully bespoke that I developed. The funniest thing that happened to me 2 months ago was my friend who is the chief data science of a big data company came to, because I told him about this stuff, and he was like sure that I was like just, you know, like vibe coding myself to death. And he came and he was blown away because he said, like, do you use GitHub? And then I said, what is GitHub? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, what do you mean? He's like, how do you store the files? Because he said, like, I see you have versions here. The version numbers are fake. But at some point I realized I was getting in trouble because, like, as I would change one tool, it would screw up the whole other. And so I developed this system of, like, versions and, like, different, like, trees and documentation. And my friend was like, it's pretty funny. Like, he said it's like Darwin. It's like you're like a pigeon that moved to another island and you, like, developed. He said like, you independently kind of discovered, like, he said it's like 60% of coding good practices.
Right.
So this is all my stuff. Of course, it uses some online repositories and, like, it's based on some dependencies, but all this stuff is that I built. Like, locally, the transcriber is built on local models for Hebrew that are, like, you know, 4, 5, 6 gigabytes. A lot of this stuff is also just personal stuff. So, like, I also have a tool that allows me to kind of, like, organize my expenses, which is something I'm just terrible at for Haaretz. So it's just for me. So it's like, it's a folder on my desktop and I just download my receipts there and it creates a nice Excel for me, simplifies the way I have to file it with Haaretz. So it's even things like that.
Could you?
What's the one you go? Oh, go ahead.
No, that's it. I think I was going the same place you, Alexios. Like, pick one of them. So we talked about the transcriber. You talked about expenses. I mean, I was sort of interested in screenshot search, but I'll defer to you. Which one's like the coolest that you're so proud
So
of, you know?
I just for a second, just because you asked. So the screenshot one is actually really funny because it's the first one I build. I have this issue with screenshots. I screenshot compulsively, and I do so always like ad hoc. So like I send my boss, some proof of something that he's now asking me about, and then the first thing I built was a script that just like organizes them according to dates. And I was like, oh, I'll check when I wrote the file, and I'll go back. And then I was just like, hold on a second. And what this is, long story short, it's a local thing that runs at the end of every day. It takes all my screenshots, which save automatically on my desktop. It saves them in a database. It does a visual analysis of them. And then I semantically search all my screenshots going back 4 years. This is a life-changing tool.
I feel like I'm gonna copy you, because honestly,
Damn, I want that.
with my Insta burners, I will occasionally go through and like screenshot ads, and then I have these ads for god awful things on my camera roll. My daughter will occasionally use my phone to put a podcast on, and I'm like, I'll delete them, and I can't remember if I saved them and where and how, and that. So yeah, that's really
the whole
valuable.
thing. And as a process, it really taught me about organizing data and like where you need everything, where you actually need computer vision. And actually, I think
plus if you're a Wikipedia nerd, I'm sure you have some thoughts on taxonomies.
So the one I want to show you is I think the one most useful for other reporters. It's called context sources, and what it is, it's based on like just the fact that I noticed that I had like in different leaks and sources that I had like source materials, like you just have unique names and emails, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if I could just have like a search tool of like all the emails and stuff that I had, in like different documents that I got leaked over the years. And it just became this kind of initial thing to just go over my Google Drive and go over my like a finite set of folders to find unique names with unique phone numbers or emails. And it just developed. It kind of grew and morphed into 3 different tools. So one is find contact, the other one is find sources, and the other one is save searches. So it's now actually extremely enriched. These are like actually read numbers. I don't mind like people seeing them, but it's like Netanyahu and like different politicians, just because like all this stuff is available at an OSINT level and is leaked at different levels. And what I've managed to do is just organize the leaks at a kind of person, like for in a data-y kind of way where I can search, and then I can find people's numbers. And it's really, the data set at this point is quite big. And I think so on the one hand, like there's something kind of privacy issue with this stuff, right? But it's all OSINT data. Like I'm not buying illegal data. It's all open. Like I think it's a good example of how OSINT at a almost kind of corporate level scale can actually now search journalists. And I think like for reporters, it saves tons of time. Like you have to find people quickly. And the other thing I managed to do was this kind of find sources tool, which I developed for myself, which is kind of to just kind of search the people in my contacts. So it's a lot of them could be just like official holders in small ministries or this kind of stuff, or people CC'd on emails that I got leaks of, right? To kind of see, to enrich that with OSINT LinkedIn data, to kind of see who worked where. So have I ever been in touch with someone who worked at a company and I don't know about, for example, right? So that's kind of that tool. And then I can save search results across kind of things. So then I can find clusters of people, right? So if I have a leaked batch of, for example, NSO would be just an easy random example, then it's quite easy for me to now find, for example, former workers. And this is stuff that I think a lot of people do when they do, OSINT on LinkedIn, right? So I think that's kind of the one example I want to search with, because I think it shows how it's allowed me to kind of accumulate knowledge and not kind of, you don't start every investigation fresh. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that, bigger organizations has. Like, if you work at Reuters, for example, you have some database like this, you know what I mean? And like, but if you're at a small news, but you don't necessarily. So that for me has just been a huge thing. And of course, if I didn't mention this, like it's also based on my own contact list. Yeah, I also fed it my own personal contact list and exported like all the emails I've ever been in touch with. And I think we've all forgotten people, we've been in touch with after, a lot of years. And there's something just interesting to be like, oh, that's right, I did talk to this guy. So now he works at this consulting firm, but before that, he actually did work at NSO, whatever, just as a random example, right? So,
and in a sense, this is like the evolution of attempts to structure our sources, to put kind of really to create structured data around their sources over time. That was, over drinks late at night at a journalism conference, you'd always be like, oh, if I, had the time, I would, catalog, or we would catalog, but they'd be clunky and it'd take time, and then you wouldn't have the semantic search. So, I do think it's worth, and you flagged it too, like this is a progression of what should have been possible, but now it's just easier and much smarter to do and represent.
But I think like as
Do you want to show us one more? We are kind of
Oh,
going way deep, but
I'm
let's do
sorry.
one more and then
So, of
we'll
course.
wrap.
The other one that I wanted to show you, which I think is really interesting and just very a local kind of thing for me, is the corporate registry. So Israel has a pretty good corporate registry, and you can actually find a lot of open source information, but you can also buy documents, right? And I built a tool that actually completely automates this pipeline for me. So I actually order the documents through my tool. It then downloads zip, extracts it, and then runs a series of analysis on it to the point where I can kind of get this UX visualization of corporate data, which is something that I never like. This is fake data, yeah, but like this is something that's just random names. But this is like it's something that I would never like be able to deal with if I couldn't see, right? Because my boss is good at corporate documents, I'm not. This kind of allows me order and look at companies in a big way and see kind of what happened, who changed directors over time. And this is just, it makes my life very easy.
And presumably connect names from this registry
All
to names of
right,
your
here we go.
sources.
Now we reach the same. Now we go to the next level. So this was the original tool. More than that, I can now do kind of this network analysis where I can also create investigations, which is a new entity within my structure where after I've finished working on an entire company, which means Claude has like locally done visual analysis. We've OCR'd all the things. There's different types of files, right? Some filings are Excels, for example. Some filings are PDF. Some of them are just like signed documents that are scanned as JPEGs, right? Like it's the entire corporate thing. So you have to like understand the different types of entities. And of course, I would never be able to formalize this, and like this tool did. So then I can bring together a number of them and then run a new analysis, which again is at a pretty simple kind of Python level search, which is just kind of like, okay, who's connected to who owns what, can we see cross references kind of thing. And then the main output all these things give for me, and I think that's really important when I do more investigative tools, is an MD file. Like it will create a file for me. It's never going to create a publishable text. It's going to create a file for me which has references to maybe websites or has some internal justification, and then I will take this MD and use it the same way you have like when you do investigations, you have like a file where you organize all your notes, right? Or I'll use that file for context on something else, but just having that is like an organizing guide. So I create these background guides for myself, which just simplify things that I would never be able to do myself and just sucked at. That's it. That's my tool.
Yeah, there's simplification and then there's organization, right? It's like there's so much stuff that we leave behind in reporting and writing, and yeah, there's a lot of value in structuring it. All right, Omer, this was wonderful. We went through a lot. I think only one cigarette, so that's also good for your health, which I'm glad.
Oh no, there was more than one.
I thought it was the same one that kept getting turned on. Never mind. Well, hopefully last one of the day. Thank you. Where can people follow you? These days it's never clear, like on your website, on your Blue Sky. How do you keep up to speed?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on X.
We'll put the profiles in the show notes.
And thank you for having me. You're doing great work, and keep it up.
Thank you, Omer. Awesome to have you. We'll also, of course, put some of our own handles in there for people to follow us as well. Anybody interested in learning more and getting more of these episodes, just hit the subscribe on this channel, on the app that you're listening in. And you can also sign up for our free newsletter at indicator.media. And I will also note that this is kind of a great segue in some ways because, we're going to be doing a lot more around how we're using AI, some of the opportunities, of course, always the risks. So I think this was a great episode to sort of, kick that off. We'll certainly be talking more about AI on the show in the future and on Indicator as well.
Yeah, especially when you were talking, Omer, about your transition, your journey from like this as pure snake oil to like, oh, there's a corner that when it comes to big data analysis cannot be wasted. And if we just give it to the bad guys, we are losing, further disadvantaging us.
Make data science human again.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks again to everyone for watching and listening. Thanks, Omer, for joining us, and good night.